So welcome to the node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for April 27th, 2022. Before we get started, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share? If not, we can move on to the CPC and board meeting updates. I don't have any updates from on the board front. We don't have Rich on the CPC side, but I don't think there's any updates on that front either. So just note that in the minutes, and then we can move on to the first issue. The first one is number 42814, which is make it possible to use fetch with proxies or other agents. I don't know if anybody has context on this one and wants to jump in, feel free. Otherwise, I'm just taking a look to see who added it on and where we should go from. So I think Matteo added it to the agenda. The comment was like, did we expose fetch too early? It is still experimental though, and there's the comments that like, hey, we got some good feedback on that. So
I don't know the answer to the question, but the context I got from that was the question. I think the question was referring to whether we unflagged it too early. So it is experimental, but it's visible by default, and I think that has broken some packages. And I guess the question is whether that is
right.
New things can break things. So I guess the question is whether whether it was. I don't know what the answer is to that.
Because the global over lands on top of other things.
I think it's the fact that global exists and packages are testing to see whether that global was there or not as some sort of feature detection. Is that?
Yes, it's more that other polyfills would replace fetch if it didn't exist, and those polyfills provide non-standard features. Like they support proxies, for example, since they are based on Node's HTTP implementation. But now that there is a global fetch, the polyfills don't fill in anymore. So we are using Node's fetch now, the built-in fetch, which doesn't have the non-standard features because our goal was to have a standard compliant implementation. So now the polyfills aren't filling in with a non-standard compliant implementation. And now people are requesting non-standard features from Node's fetch implementation, which, yeah, is what the problem boils down to. Now, if we didn't have it exposed as a global, then the non-standard polyfills would still work. So that's essentially what the risk was with exposing the global.
And the global with a particular name, I guess.
Yeah, it's just the global fetch function that would be replaced by some NPM packages.
Right.
Or it would be set if it didn't exist.
Right. But if we called it like fetch experimental, we wouldn't have had a problem, right?
Yeah, but the point is kind of to be compatible across environments, right? So there's not much of a point in having a different name. Then people can just require UNDG.
Right. Yep. Okay, so I guess sorry, I'm going to promote Rich. So I guess the key question here is like, what's the ask in terms of the discussion here? I think maybe why don't we leave it on the agenda? Like, unless anybody has a clear view of what we should try and discuss and answer on the TSC, we can leave it on until maybe next week, in case Mateo's here. Does that make sense to people?
Sounds good.
Okay, because it sounds like there's still, good discussion. Discussion is ongoing. ongoing in GitHub. We'll leave on agenda until next time to see. Yeah. Theo can help us with specific questions. Tsc to answer. Okay, thanks. The next one is rename default branch from master to main. I don't think there's any update on that this week unless anybody else has one.
No, I think you scheduled some time with me to talk about that at some point this week.
Yeah, I scheduled an hour. Am I hoping maybe we can pick off one of the more complicated ones together? And I was thinking we might look at the snap one since snaps are broken anyway. You know,
Anyway, I guess with this one, it's a watch this space next time.
Yep. Okay. The next one is util add parsargs module. This is 42675. So I think Darshan, you'd mentioned this one. Do you want to give some context?
Yeah. Sure. So the parsargs module from pkg.js was added to Node in a PR. Like it's still in a PR stage, and we were having some conversation on whether the process object or the util module is the best home for this API. So currently the PR tries to expose this from the util module, but then Jordan Harband, he mentioned that most of the things that we have in the util module are shimmable in browsers. So something like parsargs, which is completely related to the process, it doesn't really make sense in the browser. So maybe exposing this from the process object makes more sense. So Matteo, he said that maybe that's not a good idea. So his point is that if you expose this from a global thing like a process, it increases the security, it increases the surface area of attack. So then we had more discussion, and the thing is that it kind of is the same thing from util also, because if you expose an object from util, you can manipulate that in some module, and then those side effects will be shown in other places where you require it. So what we want to discuss here is if it makes sense to expose this from the process object or the util module or anything else.
So I'll just clarify for my benefit. So like this is it's right. I think what you're saying is there any difference in terms of the security surface, whether it's in util or process?
Yeah.
And do people have
right.
opinions on that, right? And then I guess secondly, do people have opinions just in general, which ones they'd prefer?
I think we were in a similar situation when the report was added to the code, in terms of it should go to the process or util, and eventually we settled on the process. But from the look of it, looks like this is more fit for the util module, because essentially we are talking about parsing stuff. But again, I'm not sure I understand the surface area differences between the two modules.
But if you place it in the util module, then it doesn't really fit in. If you look at the other functions, like most of those are shimmable on browsers. So you would normally not use parsargs on the browser because there are no command line arguments there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but node.js does not run in the, I mean, in the browser. It's for the backend, so it's bound to have the arguments. And util module is essentially for the APIs, helper APIs for similar executing similar things, right? It is well scoped within the util module.
I think most of the things in the util module are to do like things more related to JavaScript instead of things that are like completely utility functions. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe more reviews by DSC members, more opinions in the issue. Looks good to me. Why I jumped in is I remember exactly we had the same conversation for the report module. It was more of what is the best abstraction to represent the report. Not necessarily on the security side of things.
I see this, Richard has his hands up.
Yeah, I'm not fully fully sort of got my head around the security aspect of it, but the difference between process and util is you can process is a global in that it's available without explicitly requiring it, whereas util you have to require or import it to use it in your applications. So there is a difference between hanging something off util and hanging something off process. Different to the sort of semantic high level, where does it conceptually fit? There is a sort of operating difference in terms of whether you would have to import something to use it or use it directly.
Right, okay. That's maybe that helps me understand what the difference might be.
Yeah, but I think the recommended way of using process, at least inside Node, is to require the process module. Like I think we have a linter rule set for that, but I'm not 100% sure.
Tobias asked a question which might be relevant. Isn't process unavailable in ESM?
I'm not sure about that. Let me check. I think we can like use it there.
Console.log process inside an .mjs file worked for me, so yeah.
Okay. I kind of assumed we didn't expose any node-specific globals in ESM.
Any other comments, questions from people on this one? I think what I'll suggest is, since we just added this to the agenda at the last minute, people might not have had time to think about it. So let's leave it on the agenda. And I think the ask is that more TSC members think about it and get involved in that issue. Is that reasonable, Darshan?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Beth has also posted in the chat saying that if Mateo's feedback is a hard block, or asking if Mateo's feedback block is hard, because if it is a hard block, we probably need to, hear from him as to let him articulate his reasons or expand on them.
It certainly seems like a hard block to me.
Same here. Like he said, he's -1 about doing this, so I would consider that a hard block.
Okay, so I think, doubly so, let's ask more TSC members to take a look. We'll leave it on the agenda until we've got Mateo who can talk to it as well, and we can go from there. Sound good? Okay, so let's move on to the next issue. It's the 2022 TSC Chair Election. So the end of the term is end of May. So we've opened this issue. There's some discussion back and forth in terms of timing. Adjusted the timeline to fit with some of the suggestions there. So the plan will be to open call for nominations on May 9th. I think Jarish, you'd suggested a vice chair. And so maybe do you want to just introduce that and we can have a discussion on that particular topic?
Sure. So I believe Mary proposed that concept of vice chair originally. And in my opinion, it's a good to have thing because probably with a role definition of assisting the chair in general, such as running in certain time zones, or helping with taking notes, or helping with follow up on certain actions and things like that.
I think I'm +1 as well. Like, I think it'd be good to have somebody else as well who's willing and able to step in and get involved in some of the things that I get pulled into.
Yeah, co-chair or vice chair sounds like a really good idea, especially given that the main function of the chair is to run meetings, and the way we schedule meetings, it's more or less guaranteed that most members will routinely miss one of the 3 to 4 meeting slots. So it certainly seems to make sense rather than having Michael have to ad hoc ask Jarish or whoever else to run the meeting every, once a month or whatever. Just have a standing position that does it.
Does anybody have any concerns? I hear +1s, which is good.
We should check to make sure that it's that there's nothing in the charter that would somehow require changing for something like this, but I can't imagine there is, but it's worth checking. But other than that, I'm +1, yeah.
Okay, I think, yeah, I mean, we'll need to change something somewhere regardless.
Yeah, hopefully it's just a governance MD and we can do it with a pull
Yeah.
request or something. Hopefully it's not a change to the charter, but if it is a
Yep.
change to the charter, I'll take it to the CPC and we'll get it done.
Yep. Yeah, I don't, yeah, exactly. Okay, so it sounds like we should plan for that. Do people have opinions on vice chair, co-chair?
I mean, if there's a way to sort of help guarantee that the vice chair is someone who will, has a different schedule than the won't miss all the same meetings as the TSC chair, but I guess we can cross that bridge when we get to it. I'm probably thinking too far ahead.
Sorry, you froze out there, at least for me. Oh, maybe it's me.
Oh, I froze or Richard froze?
No, I think it might be me freezing.
Okay, what I said is not that important anyway. Go ahead, Richard.
No, I was going to say, if we did want the chair and vice chair to be in different time zones, that may, sort of just mechanics wise, it may be that we would have to have different rounds of voting or something, and that it would probably then we'd have to have the chair elected to discover what time zone they would be in before looking at the vice.
We could separate the elections we'd stagger the elections by 6 months, for example, or something like that. But
yeah, because otherwise, unless all the candidates for the chair were in the same time zone, it'd be hard to sort of,
Yeah, and staggering actually has a problem because then it means the vice chair can never run to be chair really. Well, anyway, all right, I'm overthinking it. I think we're all overthinking it, but vice chair sounds like a good idea. Let's at least get a vice chair. And then if there are problems like the ones we're anticipating, we can deal with it then.
That's good.
Okay, because I think it would be workable to say the two elections and stuff. But if we just want to start with like, let's just elect the vice chair and then we can go from there. I think that's a great thing to do this year. We can see how it works out and then we can figure out how to iterate on that to improve how it works.
Right. Yeah. If we have to iterate, there's the time zone thing, or we can just have multiple vice chairs. There's lots of possibilities. We can figure it out. When the problem arises, if it ever arises.
Okay. I will, I think just, it sounds like from the discussion here, everybody's in favor of vice chair. We should probably, because we don't have everybody here, just open an issue that says, here's what's proposed, and we'll, make sure that we don't get any objections or whatever, and then we can plan that in. We still have a couple weeks before the election launches. So.
And Bethany suggests that, maybe just whoever comes in second for chair could be asked to be vice chair, which I think makes a lot of sense. It might even make sense that anybody who runs for chair, anybody who put their name in the hat to run for chair can be vice chair or something, and as long as there aren't objections, we're gonna have like 4 vice chairs or something. But anyway.
Yeah. Why don't I'll take the action to open an issue with the base, like, hey, we've agreed we should have a vice chair, and then we can ask people to chime in there in terms of like, how should it run? The simplest, I'll put in the simplest case, and then we can go from there in the issue. Sound good? Okay. That's good. Thanks, Jarish, for bringing that up and reminding us that we sort of planned to do that, and this is a good time to do that. On to the next issue, the Node.js admin. So create pat for block list import export. I think this one is basically I think there's enough approvals in there, because I think we only require a couple +1s. I think maybe the reason it's still here is like somebody, wait a sec, block list token, right? Okay, so maybe we can just take this off, because I can see that some people have been added and have made it move forward, because I think that's the last I'd heard. It was just waiting on somebody to be able to help out. Anybody feel otherwise? Otherwise, I'll just remove it from the agenda issue. Okay, great. The next one, which is the Node.js build toolchain initiative, needs a champion, number 13. So Rich, I think you put that on the agenda, right?
Possibly, probably, but just Mary has is on an indefinite hiatus, and does not have the time or inclination or whatever it may be to continue to lead that initiative. So we need somebody else to lead it, or we should remove it from the list until we have somebody to lead it. I don't really have a strong, this was house cleaning on my part. I'm not feeling a urgent need to get a decision today or anything like that. Just something we should do at some point, preferably today.
Yeah. I think that's a good FYI to say, like, if there is a champion, suggest yourself, step up. Otherwise, I'd agree. Like, if we don't have a champion, we should remove it until we do.
And I'm sorry, but I didn't realize this, but I have to go. So thanks, everybody. Okay. See you next time.
So my proposal on this one is, like, let's leave it open till next week. And if we don't get a champion from then, let's just plan to remove it. Does that make sense to people?
I'm wondering if we can use the Twitter account to like see if there's any volunteer for this. Otherwise, if we just use the GitHub issue, I wonder how many people will actually see this.
Right. I guess it's do we think Do we think, like, do we need somebody, like, somebody gonna be able to come from who's not part of the TSC, or I guess the collaborator base? And it's a good question whether the collaborator base would see this here and be successful. Like, should we be just ask, like, who would we ask to step up? Is it anybody, or is it maybe one of the collaborators, or what do you think on that front?
Do we have any requirement about the champion?
That's actually something in my mind where it may be written that the champion is somebody on the TSC, but I don't think we want to make that a blocker. You know, I think in the past we may have had cases where like somebody was the champion, but then there was somebody on the TSC who would like maybe agreed to keep on top of what was going on and just talk about it in the meeting. But I'd be personally happy if we change that to just be like, no, it can be anybody who's the champion. They can put updates in the issue as we sometimes do. We can also, you know, invite them to TSC meetings if there's significant updates that need to be done in person. So from that perspective, I think we can work to change it so that it could be anybody. On what I just wonder is in terms of the success path to changing our build thing, how close or non-close do you need to be to the original to the existing project? Like, would somebody just who's not been contributing to the project at all be able to come in and do that?
I think there were two separate issues, weren't there, in the build tooling? One was for Node itself, as in what do we use to build core, but then the other was around native add-ons, and they're sort of related because at the moment they're both using the sort of GYP tooling, but the add-ons could be broken off into its own initiative, in that there's no reason that they have to be linked. And in that sort of respect, I could see you wouldn't need to be so invested into sort of how Node Core is built in order to look at how add-ons are being built and sort of, you know, maybe the advantages to not be embedded in the Node ecosystem to have a fresh look at how add-ons are built for Node. But definitely for building Node, I think you need some familiarity with how it's built into to be able to sort of suggest the migration path. So it's kind of one initiative, but I can't remember if we split it, if we sort of formally defined which of those two it was focusing on, or whether it was trying to do both, because they don't need to be looked at the same time.
I thought the two were linked in that the add-ons use the GYPI to
yes, but I mean,
build.
That's because it's the way it's currently done. So that could be divorced from the core build system. There's a long-standing open issue in Node GYP. I mean, there is another issue about maintainers for Node GYP, but there is an issue in Node GYP about moving away from using common GYPI, and that would break the dependency on the sort of Node build script output. At least as far as the tooling is concerned.
So that would be some kind of prerequisite to moving Node Core from JIP, I guess.
Potentially. It doesn't have to be. It would make it harder if we had to maintain common GYPI when we were not using it to build core. But I mean, that is an option as a sort of compatibility. So I mean, the problem with the main issue with the ecosystem is there's an awful lot of stuff out there that doesn't get updated often, but it's still popular. So trying to do a migration of the ecosystem from GYP to something else would be very challenging, I think. And that's before you get to the, well, what is the path? What do we envisage the path forward being, and then how would you actually implement that?
I think the past discussions have always landed on GYP will have to be supported for add-ons for some probably substantial period of time, no matter what you do. I think they can be decoupled, But I'd be hesitant to say, let's choose a new add-on thing until we know, until we figure out what we'd want to do for core. Because I think one might inform the other, even though they can be separate.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to use GYP to build node add-ons today. It's just it
No.
is the sort of the default option, I guess, is the way it's the path of least resistance. But many popular add-ons do not use GYP, and you know are sort of.
Yeah, and definitely the node add-on API work. There's been work related to supporting, you know, CMake, and I know, you know, a reasonable number of people use that instead. But I guess my opinion here is just as like the first part of figuring out what we would use for node core is kind of the one you'd want to do first. But just my opinion.
Yeah, the existing work in that repository that the issue is in is all about node core. So there are 3 PRs where Mary did some work on arguing for and against certain tool chains, and those are all just concerning node core, not any npm packages. And there's also a separate issue in the same repository about forming a group. So there were a few people interested in joining that group, and that might be in the long term, regardless of whether we have a volunteer for championing that group, we might still have people interested in working on it. So finding a champion might just be a formality if we have enough people working on it.
Yeah, I guess maybe asking if we haven't already asked in that discussion. Where's that the switch issue? Is it the?
It's 11. Right. You opened that 2 months ago.
Okay. So maybe like if we haven't asked in that issue, that would be the place to say, you know, is there anybody who would like to be the champion? Because if that's the most ideal case if there's people already interested in working on it, right?
Is there anyone else other than Mary who's actively working on this? I guess there is no.
I might have frozen. Did everybody else hear Joey?
Sorry?
I didn't hear what you said, but it may have just been my side versus everybody else. I don't know.
I'm wondering if there's anyone else other than Mary who's actively working on this.
I'm not aware of anyone. I don't know if anyone else is.
I guess we can maybe use the Twitter account to promote this work a little bit and see if there's any more volunteer to join before we move it like out of the strategic initiatives.
Yeah. That sounds like a good suggestion.
Yeah, if there are more people like joining this effort, maybe we can postpone that a bit until we found and then we'll find someone who's willing to be a champion, even if they're not on the TSC. But if there's no one who's going to actively working on it, then I guess we'll have to just remove it.
Right. So I guess if we want to send out a tweet, is that something you're happy to do? I posted the link to the node tweet repo. If you create a PR that has the tweet there, that will get it retweeted or tweeted out by the node account.
Sounds good. I will do that.
Okay, thanks. Take a quick note, so I'll put that in there too, just in case you want to go to the minutes for it. Okay, that sounds good. We have a next step, and then we'll see how that goes and can talk about it next time. I see under strategic initiatives, Joey, that you filled in some info, which is the next thing on the agenda. So why don't we start with that while I bring up the others?
Okay, so it's been a while since I update about the startup performance initiative in the TSC meeting. I've been adding embedded snapshot support to workers, and hopefully the VM context as well later. And I opened an issue to request feedback about the userland snapshot JavaScript API, which allows users to add user-defined, deserialize, and serialize callback for their own objects, as well as setting a main function in the snapshot so that when you deserialize the snapshot, you don't have to like specify another main script from the command line. You can just like the resulted binary can just enter a main function and do whatever the user wanted to do. So I guess that would effectively make the binary some sort of single executable file. But it's still a little bit different from the packaging stuff, which also has, for example, virtual file system support. So I also opened an issue about snapshot and packaging interop. So I guess that's all for startup performance.
Okay, thanks. Antoine, anything on the Core Promise API side of things? Actually, I should double check. We didn't, sorry, Antoine didn't make it this week, so I'll skip that. Next 10 is the other one that we have somebody here from. So we have submitted sessions for OpenJS World Collaborator Summit. We're planning like the mini summit deep dives for ESM and observability, as well as if there is like, you know, a common core track like we've done in the past, submitted a session for that as well. There is also, you know, we just had the meeting today. So one of the other updates is one of the outcomes from the earlier mini summit on types was to try and add in some extra requirements into our docs so that they could be structured so that we can more easily parse and generate the type information that, like, you know, TypeScript needs and anybody else would need. So Tierney has a PR to do that. I think it's now in a form that's ready to land. And the goal is to get that landed. And then Tierney's actually going to submit a PR to add updating the docs as a strategic initiative. I see that as kind of like it's a longer term thing where doc by doc, we can look to update them to fit into that that structure. And I think, like I, you know, earlier we'd looked at the parser that will parse them, and we can make it so that it can parse just the ones that have been transitioned. And but I think that that'll be an interesting strategic initiative to sort of go through and do those updates. As Joey mentioned, there's still some discussion back and forth in terms of the outcome from the single executable binary. I put together a brief prototype. I haven't had any time to spend any more time, but there has been some really good discussion in that issue. And I think the other one that we planned, I guess, related to the OpenJS world is Matteo has also submitted a HTTP follow-up session to sort of say, okay, we, you know, exposing fetch was one of the first steps for modern HTTP in terms of the plan we talked about, but let's talk about other steps and review how it's going so far. So I think that's the update on the next 10 so far. Any questions on that? Okay, if not, I think that takes us to the end of the agenda. Are there any other issues that people think we should talk about in the public session before we close out? If not, thanks for everybody's time. Please do stick around for a short private session, and many thanks to everybody who's watching the video. We'll see everybody next time. And just before I stop the stream, I'm going to grab the